start out by asking you to like walk around a little bit. These are the historical galleries, and we'll convene in maybe like 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, and you'll tell me what you got out of just looking around, and then I'll tell you what I get out of this space, or what story I think this particular exhibition is trying to tell. All right, go ahead. And it goes all the way to the back. I think those are still evolving. Those kind of change in response to things that I see going on. There's a curator that I met in Scotland, also an independent curator, her name's Kirsty MacDonald. And she had this idea about what curating is. She was like, curating is things that we used to call organizing or managing or even administration. But that places those activities within a particular cultural context or a particular cultural environment and sort of positions those in relation to the demands or needs of that particular cultural context. And so that's very much what my practice does. I am very deliberate about being responsive to particular contexts, to particular moments, to particular needs. So right now, the thing that I'm looking at doing is documenting histories and developments in the voice of this place, right? There have been people who have been doing that for a long time, people like Dr. Boxer and Dr. Pepe, Dr. Archer Straw. There are people who were doing that, but I think that it's like a mantle that needs to be taken up again now, to make sure that we continue to own our own stories, I guess. So that's a lot of what I'm interested in, which is a little bit more art historical than curatorial, strictly speaking. But I suppose I'm navigating that right now while trying to respond to living artists with whatever form of support I can still provide while doing that. So studio visits, other kinds of engagement, putting people in touch with opportunities, writing about artists and the context that they work in. But I think very few people are focused on people who work and live in the region. I think a lot of the momentum that we see right now is around diaspora artists, and that is important, and I think it should happen. But I'm certainly very invested in making sure that artists who do decide to work and live in the space and therefore be invested in the region in a particular way that comes with particular limitations, I am most interested in responding to those artists. So if there was a focus for my curatorial work right now, that would probably be it. My background is cultural studies. So in my undergrad, I did one of very few cultural studies programs that existed for a bachelor's. It was called Humanities, Media and Cultural Studies at McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. And that program I don't think it still exists. It was kind of just a flash in the pan. It happened for a couple of years. I had the opportunity to take advantage. And then for my master's at the University of Leeds, I did post-colonial literary and cultural studies. And so for me, I suppose all along it has been about evolving a particular set of analytical skills, right? Skills that I could apply to texts, but skills that I could also apply to cultural contexts, like ways of thinking through a cultural moment, which then connects to what my curatorial work ends up being about, is that having the capacity to analyze texts that people are generating, but also to analyze sort of the social fabric and the discourse around culture as text. Then you can get a sense of what is needed. And then my curatorial work is pretty much all of those activities. And I do think what I find very attractive about being a curator is that it does have that element of flexibility. It's a field always in, that's always growing, always evolving, and that has quite a bit of room for different kinds of activities. Again, why I like Christine McDonald's definition is that it's about positioning those activities within a cultural landscape. And that's the curatorial part of it, is the making that connection between what you're doing and the landscape that you're working in. There's lots of exciting stuff. I mean, I think much like the Jamaican art scene, there's a moment where lots of initiatives that were begun like maybe in the 90s are kind of coming of age, right? So I'm thinking here about like Alice Yard in Trinidad, Freshman Work in Barbados, Tembe Art Studios in Suriname. You have these nodes that were invested in at an early moment and that people actually put it in to sustain them, that now have been operating for a long enough time that their impact is starting to be seen, right? And you know, also things like the National Gallery of the Bahamas and in the Cayman Islands, also their National Gallery, doing some important work. So a lot of work has been going in, and now we're starting to see some of the fruits of that. That includes some international attention coming this way, but that also includes the creation of communities, right? And people who can navigate that or channel that in certain ways. So I know that, for example, right now, Chris Cozier is doing he's engaged the Berlin Biennial on like a couple of things where he's been able to activate other artists with that, and he's been doing that for some time. People like Deborah Antinger at the NLS have also for some time been connecting artists with opportunities. You know, she did the Emerge Art Fair in DC a couple of years ago. She worked with Laisha Johnson and DeAndre C. Davis on this Blue Coat residency in the UK. So those kinds of connections have been being made, and so people are getting a sense that, oh, something is happening, right? But as I said, it's also that same vulnerable moment. I think what's happening in Jamaica is quite indicative of what's happening more broadly. At this point, we have to build the institutions. We have to make sure to steward this in a way that we want, right? So that it doesn't just become, I mean, that problematic relationship between collectors and intuitives, you know what I mean? That can happen on a broader basis. You know what I'm saying? We don't want to just become a sort of source of raw materials to be sent out to some metropole somewhere to be processed into and be sold back to us. We're not interested in doing that over again. And so there are certain things that we need to do at this time to make sure that that doesn't happen. So those are kind of broad things. There are also some artists that I'm really excited about. People like Sheena Rhodes and Mark King. It's a whole range, but it's definitely a sort of bubbling cauldron. You know what I mean? There are things happening, things coming up, all kinds of engagements, arguments as well, and conflicts. But things are going on, and we're more connected than we've ever been. I mean, I think that we have to give a lot of credit to Honey Bino and Nadia Huggins, an art magazine, for really congealing that in a certain moment and making a certain possibility. It's something that has been talked about for a long time. If you go back into the archives, Caribbean artists have been talking about figuring out ways to connect with other Caribbean artists for a long, long time. But I think that ARC did that in a really dramatic way, and now there are more and more venues for that kind of interaction to happen, which also means that in some ways we are operating as a region. Like Jamaican artists are not just thinking about Jamaican artists, they're thinking about artists in Trinidad and artists in Barbados, artists in, Guyana, all kinds of places. I think that that's super exciting. I can't say I grew up wanting to be a curator or something. There were just certain things that I thought needed to be done. And then whatever label is going to allow me to do that. You know what I mean? And if in 5 years it's another label, I would happily adopt another label. I'm not married to this one. But that is the primary thing. When I'm looking and I'm seeing artists producing, and I'm seeing really important intellectual work happening, right? In the sphere of the visual, which I think has particular potential as an intellectual exercise. And then you start to think, okay, what would it take to make this viable, right? To make this possible for people in a real way. You can look and there are clear things that need to happen. You need to have writing, you need to have criticism, you need to have community, you need to have opportunities to show the work, ways for the work to be accessible, particularly on an island. Where it's not like, oh, we're a little bit out of the way because we're in Jersey or in Maine. We have to take a train to get to us. No, you have to fly down here for how much money. You know what I mean? I also started to understand that if it's not on the internet, it does not exist. If your business is not on Google Maps, it does not exist, right? And so these kinds of representational issues that I think are particularly pressing in a place like this, but are also relevant in places like New York and London, but are particularly necessary here. And because we do not have the institutions to train people and compensate people in an active way, then you have to be really dedicated to it. And I mean, my dedication is not because I'm a particularly nice person. It's because I also have a fair amount of privilege that gives me, that I have the choice about being dedicated to something like this. You know what I mean? I don't have to go and work somewhere to send back money for my parents. You know what I mean? At some point, I will need to begin to do that. But they've been able to delay that for me. I also have 5 siblings. You know what I mean? So I can split the labor. So there are things like that that give me the choice to commit to doing this that other people cannot. But I think it's absolutely that thing. It's realizing that there is a need for a particular kind of agency within our cultural context, and then trying to respond to that in very deliberate ways. So I do think exhibition making is very important in that way. But I think exhibition making has to be supported by other things, like writing, like documentation, like partnership. I mean, the reason why this exhibition is a success, if I do say so myself, is because it happened in partnership. You know what I'm saying? Dunkley has been on exhibition in the National Gallery of Jamaica for like 20 years at least, right? Yeah, something like that. On permanent exhibition. So it's not that it wasn't exhibited before, but again, locating these activities within a particular cultural landscape. And so the exhibition of the work was located in a different way within the cultural landscape, which gave it greater visibility, right? And you have this with other kinds of activity as well. I think that the National Gallery of Jamaica has very carefully and deliberately built over time the capacity to do some of that work too. So if an artist exhibits here, they do get a certain level of exposure. That's really important. But even, the other day somebody was asking me about what I think one of the most important exhibitions for me for my career. I think the exhibition is one. I think Natural Histories is one. It was the first one. But also the exhibition I did at with my aspiration Gordon was also very important for me, because people who weren't aware, who were in Jamaica, of what was happening in the contemporary art scene, that became a medium where they could develop an awareness, right? And just even start to be curious about it. So I think exhibitions definitely do that work, but supported by the other things. You know, the exhibition has to be located in a particular way in order to have the full force. I think artists in the Caribbean diaspora actually have quite a bit of support. Maybe not as much support as like, you know, a 28-year-old white male artist, you know what I mean? But they have support that exists for them. So I am much more interested in being deliberate about working with artists that live in the region, that have located themselves in that way, with all the limitations that implies, right? Because then, you know, access to grants, access to studio space, access to exhibition opportunities, for an artist to make that decision to stay in a place like Jamaica and to remain invested in staying in a place like Jamaica. So not staying here in a sort of bitter, resentful mode, right? I really respect that decision because there's so much that you give up to do that. And to me, it reads as a sort of ethical imperative, which I find very compelling. So the artists that I am most interested in engaging are those artists, the artists who stay in the place, who figure out some way to make it work out. And that often includes creating opportunities for other artists, some kind of social or space-making element that these artists build into their practice, which is another area where they do need that additional support because they're trying to do more with less, really. So those are sort of my target artists, those artists that I get most excited by.
So firstly, the way in which you set up